Hey friends, Wise Squirrels needs your support. We're looking for sponsors for the podcast, for the website, for the newsletter. We'll give you some shout outs on social and all the good places. Reach out to us today. hello@wisesquirrels.com. And in the subject, just write sponsorship and we'll follow up with you directly. Thanks. Wise Squirrels is brought to you by The Root Down, an ADHD-inspired presentation and process to know, respect, and connect yourself. Available now for conferences and savvy companies. The Root Down will bring your team together, teach them about neurodiversity, and a lot more. Check out The Root Down, read the reviews over at wisesquirrels.com today. Welcome to Wise Squirrels, a podcast for late diagnosed adults with ADHD. I'm your host, Dave Delaney. So I just want to make sure I don't mispronounce your name, but it's Aviva Nirenberg.
Correct. Perfect.
Okay.
Is this your personal logo or is this like a business? Like, where do you use it?
Oh, you're talking about the smiley face?
The DD. Yeah. The smileys. Yeah.
Yeah. So I use it on my personal website, which I'm doing some work on right now, but, and then I use it in my presentations. I do a lot of public speaking, so I use it in my presentations a lot and on social media too.
Making me smile.
Yay! That's what I like to hear. Thank you, first of all, for agreeing to join me. I've been really excited to talk to you about, your work as an ADHD coach, and Let's talk about, first of all, how your past, I think your husband and kids might have helped lead you to where you are today. So let's go ahead and get started talking about how you got into ADHD coaching.
Yeah. So you're correct in that it's through my husband and my kids that I embarked on this journey. I think, when my kids were younger, my knowledge of ADHD was pretty limited and typical, thinking that it's just boys, hyperactive boys. And when one of my boys, I have two boys and a girl, was, I don't know, I'd say like a preteen, maybe 10 or 11, one of his teachers said something, they thought he had ADHD. And I thought to myself, he can't have ADHD. He could sit for 5 hours and do a puzzle and other things, the things that he enjoyed, right?
Mm-hmm.
He could sit for hours. So I totally discounted that, and many more years went by before my daughter, who is my youngest child, was diagnosed at the age of 13. And on that journey to be the best mom, I discovered coaching, but I didn't really even understand what coaching was when I started my ADCA class. I really just wanted tools to help my kids, and I only through learning more about coaching and actually coaching did I really understand what coaching was and the power of coaching in general, and specifically ADHD coaching to help people with ADHD. And my husband was like the last of the whole group to get diagnosed. And that was also very put so many things into perspective that we had struggled with for so many years. And it was just very enlightening, the whole process, and learning how differently ADHD shows up in different people as well. Each of my kids, my husband, and clients as well. Now, everyone's ADHD is so different. There may be some commonalities, but no one shows up exactly the same way.
Yeah, that's a common thing I've heard. Obviously, we have the handy acronym ADHD, and so that stands for stuff. But tell me a little bit about the differences, or maybe some of the commonalities that you've noticed between different people, like different clients, for example.
So I think an almost universal struggle is getting motivated on the stuff that's not fun, that's not your area of interest. I think that is one thing that links, I would say, pretty much everyone that has ADHD. And as far as the other challenges, like the organization or time management, I've had clients that had this one girl who was very good at time management, very good at managing her time, very good at judging time, how long things would take. And it's very interesting. And you talk about like that nature versus nurture. She was from a military family, and she grew up in a very structured environment where that was just like her bread and water. And on the other hand, you know, you have people that time management is the bane of their existence. And organization too. Like I found people that know kind of intuitively that they think better, feel better, are less stressed when their environment is organized. So they kind of like intuitively knew that about themselves. And even though it didn't come easy for them, they, you know, learned to, whether it's like through being minimalist with their stuff, but having systems to keep themselves organized. And, you know, we know other people, organization of their stuff, their space is, you know, torture. So I think those are a couple examples, you know, that what could be for one client a real struggle, for another is, you know, comes naturally, or they've learned those systems, you know, from their environment, from family, whatever it is, at some point to keep themselves going.
What are some ways that you have seen, or maybe not ways, but systems that people have used to improve outcomes, you know, whether it's their career or family life?
I mean, that's a really broad question, Dave. So,
well, let's start with like technology. Like, are there apps that you find or software that you find that people use to help, you know, stay organized ultimately?
Yeah. So I think that's also very individual. You know, some people, you know, with all the technology, still like the paper and pen planner and the whiteboard and the paper calendar on their wall. And I think there is, and for sure, there are also people that love the technology, but I think there is like a power to, I know, like we know a lot about the brain and actually writing, and how actually writing something has much more of, I don't know if the word is, imprint on our brain, especially with working memory deficits. Also, we know that people with ADHD are very visual, and as cool as certain technology could be, you still have to remember to pick up your phone, open the app, whether it's a to-do app, like a to-do list app, or whether it's a productivity app, or whether it's a habit app. There are a lot of cool apps out there. There really are. And for people that technology is their thing, there's a lot to explore and a lot of great things for ADHD. But I think we can't forget that, like paper, pencil, you know, whiteboards, because we know that we see what we do. You know, that's the for better, for worse, right? You know, like whatever is in front of you. And if you see that whiteboard right in front of you, whereas with, you know, your top priorities for the day, whereas on your phone, you have to remember to open up your phone, look into the app, or look on your calendar, what your meetings, your priorities are for that day. It takes a few more steps. So not to say that people aren't successful with the apps and technology, but you have to be, you know, it requires an extra level of an engagement, you know, to think, to use it, to open it, and to use it regularly.
Yeah, and not just making lists like by pen, but also scratching items off the list when you accomplish them. There's something, that tactile interaction I find is extremely satisfying. It's more so than clicking a box and watching it, like, you know, get a strike through online. Instead, like, scratching it with a pen and being, I did it.
Yeah, it's funny because you're saying that, Dave, because for years I would have my to-do list, and sometimes I would end up doing something, an errand I forgot or whatever it was, and then I would put it on my list and cross it off. And I thought I was like crazy, like, why am I doing this? And I only later learned in one of my courses or trainings that actually gives you that dopamine hit. You know, writing it, and, you know, whether you cross it off or check it off, however you do it, gives you that dopamine. So yeah, and ADHD brains are starved for dopamine. So if you can get that dopamine, you know, and it gives you more motivation to do that next priority item.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, for me personally, like as it applies to time management, That's my number one. I did an executive functions kind of survey to see sort of where my strengths and weaknesses are. And my three strengths, the strongest skills are in time management, flexibility, and then goal directed persistence / stress tolerance was a tie for the third place.
Yeah.
But time management is a big one. Yeah. I'm super anal with my time. And so, like, for example, I mean, we're talking today because this meeting was on my calendar. If it wasn't on my calendar, I wouldn't be here. Like everything is on my calendar. And it took a while. And this is something I obsessed about way before being diagnosed, at 50 with ADHD. So I didn't know I had ADHD, but I knew that I needed everything on a calendar. And so my wife, is amazing. And she writes it all down and has a calendar on the fridge to keep us, in check and the kids aware. But for me personally, I needed like a digital calendar that integrated into my calendar. So I created like a separate Google Calendar in addition to my business one for family stuff. And now, God bless her, she adds things there so that it appears on mine. So I can actually like overlay those two calendars digitally and look and see and say, okay, we can't talk today because we have a doctor's appointment or whatever.
Yeah. You just said a lot. I don't know what point to even bring up first, but I want to say that, one of the, where technology can really help us, where it's much harder to do on paper, is that idea of sharing a calendar, sharing a grocery list or whatever it is, that it's much harder to, someone else to copy your list or to share, tasks that way. The other thing you were saying a little bit earlier was you made a really good point in talking about your strengths in executive function, because we're talking about ADHD showing up differently for each person, is that no one is weak in all the executive functions. Even someone, if there were a scale of ADHD, how strongly it impacts you on a really strong case of ADHD is not going to be weak on all the executive functions. And to know what your strengths are, not just in executive function, but know what your strengths are in general and really lean into your strengths, because we know that creating a life or even just coaching on your weaknesses is not very empowering. When we feel our best and we are our best, we're living a life of our strengths. We need to deal with our weaknesses. I'm not, pushing them to the background or avoiding them, but leaning into those strengths.
Yeah. One of my weakest skill is planning and prioritizing. So it's and that often kind of I'll focus on, and yourself, right? With ADHD folks, when we embark in something creative, something we enjoy doing, like a podcast, let's say, then we end up spending so much time doing that fun stuff, but not like the stuff, not prioritizing the things that need to be prioritized, like financial, stuff.
Yeah. And that's one of the cool things I learned, is that on one hand, you're right. Like, you can forget the important stuff that's not so interesting when you're doing that fun stuff. But on the other hand, I think we're like in the neurotypical world, people want to get done the hard stuff first. But for ADHD, you can use those fun things that create that dopamine for you strategically. They can give you the dopamine to also tackle the harder things, the less, exciting things, the monotonous things.
Do you mean like by doing those monotonous things as like rewards after that dopamine hit? Like,
you could use it as so you could say it that you're doing that reward. You get your reward first instead of afterwards. The challenge is, because it's the idea of fun first instead of like the fun as the treat afterwards. But the challenge is, being able to that time management piece, being able to have that boundary, like having an activity that has a set ending, or, having some other way to draw that boundary that you don't get lost in that fun activity and, then forget about the activity you need to do as well.
Yeah,
that needs that dopamine.
It's an interesting thing. Like, it's a great idea to maybe Yeah, to start with the reward, that dopamine, that thing that triggers the dopamine, assuming it's a healthy thing to do. But yeah, I like that a lot. Actually, I think that's a great idea. Um, I know you lived overseas for 12 years. Where did you live? Tell me a little bit about your background.
So, I'm American. I did grow up in America, and I lived here for the first 30 years of my life. And my husband was working for an international company that gave him a few choices of where he could be transferred. And a few of them we kind of discounted right away because it involved our kids learning a lot of new languages.
Mm.
And some of the European choices. And he ended up taking a transfer to Tel Aviv. And I was a little bit nervous about it, to be perfectly honest. Although I had some family living in Israel, distant cousins. It was one of those things, honestly, as a neurotypical, that if I had thought about it for a long time, it would have taken me 10 years to make that move. But we had an opportunity that we had about 2 weeks. My husband had about 2 weeks to make the decision. And so I had to make like a kind of, I wouldn't say totally impulsive because it was thought out, but short-term thought out,
Mm.
And 2 weeks later, he was on a plane. I had a little bit more time to pack up and get the kids together and kind of close things off here. But we ended up, it was a 2-year commitment that ended up being 12 and a half years.
Wow.
So, yeah. And then things kind of brought us back here, some family needs. And we were back in Denver, and now we're in New York, where we both started out originally.
That's wild. That's wild. So, but yeah, and you mentioned, the learning languages. Are the kids at least proficient in Hebrew now? At least
They are. My kids are definitely bilingual. In fact, my youngest daughter is living there. She went back after high school, and she's in nursing school there. And yeah, she said like all that moving around is worth it because it's very funny. So in her program, the program itself is in Hebrew, but as I don't know if you know this, but all medical textbooks are pretty much in English. Most research is in English. So the Israeli students have to take very high level English classes in the program. She placed out of that from her like English essay, her verbal SAT.
Right.
And the fact that she graduated from high school in America, but they looked at her SAT score. But also as a foreign student, she would have had Hebrew requirements, but because her Hebrew was good enough that she placed out of that. So she basically had one day she didn't have classes when everyone else did. So
Oh,
she
nice.
felt like all that hard work was worth it because it's not easy moving. It's not easy came back to America when my kids were teenagers. So even though they, their roots were here, they'd spent a majority of their childhood there. So that was also hard. But now I think, are grateful, for that opportunity. And knowing so many people in so many different places is also, one of those benefits of moving. I think you learn to adjust and adapt to different environments more easily when you've been tested that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I worked for a restaurant slash bar slash folk club in Toronto a million years ago. And my boss every Sunday would have she called it Bella Did You Eat? And it was a Jewish brunch with like non-kosher, but it was still like all the fixins. So, latkes and blintzes and all the things that are just making me hungry thinking about. But she also had live bands play too. So they were always like, Hebrew, singing in Hebrew or Yiddish performers and all that stuff. So yeah. And she taught me like all the different versions of oy, of oy, like oy vey, oy kavol. Like, so, yeah, in fact, I just posted something about this, I think on Facebook not that long ago, saying like, I hope it's okay with all my Jewish friends that I totally use Oy and Oikavolt and all the other ones because it's like the best saying ever. Summarizes everything.
What's really cool? It's making me think about, how they say like the Alaskan native language has however many words for snow, different types of snow. So I think that Yiddish as a language has a lot of like negative words, like all the words for oi, and I
Uh-huh.
think because Yiddish culture developed, I guess, in Eastern Europe when there was a lot of persecution. I'm just guessing. When there's
Mm.
a lot of persecution, there was a lot of life was hard. But the interesting thing about Hebrew has like 7 or 8 words for happiness, like different types of joy and happiness.
Huh.
And I think it's a much more positive language, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. That makes
Yes,
sense.
I thought that was very, very cool.
And positivity is something that, is near and dear to your heart. How do you work with your clients to, especially on down days, perhaps, work on their positivity, on their spirit and their mood?
So that's a good question. I think when someone's feeling really down, you do have to have that empathy and tune into where they are and meet them where they're at. At the same time, I do feel, and I know from my own life that even in the most difficult situations or most difficult days, there's always something to be grateful for, and you can always find that like kernel, of positivity or blessing in, whether it's just a rough day or, something more monumental, like a really difficult challenge that people are going through. So I think it's a combination, of that really, feeling for them, where they're at and validating their, whether it's fear or pain or whatever, emotion they're feeling, but helping them to tune into what's good, or what's potential there is for growth in a situation. I mean, it really depends on the situation. If someone's dealing with a major loss, you can't talk to them about growth. If after the fact, they talk about post-traumatic growth, I think you have more perspective to see how you have grown or how you could have grown, from a situation. But it's, I guess it's relative to how large the situation is when you can tune into that growth piece.
I like the idea, getting back to or not getting back, but what's the saying? Lemons in a lemonade, right? Like changing
100%.
changing your perspective. In 2020, the world seemed to be imploding, and in addition to the stresses that we were all experiencing, our a tornado came through Nashville, where I live, and destroyed my kid's school.
Wow.
And then 3 months later, another storm came and left us with 10 holes in our roof and 7 trees down. And we basically had to leave our house for 3 months and then in addition to all of my business, all the work, I had to also, dealing with shoddy contractors and insurance claims virtually because of COVID. It was just incredibly stressful. And at that time, I dabbled with meditation over the years, but it was at that time that I actually took it much more seriously and started a daily practice, and have found, mindfulness as a result of meditation has really helped me to sort of pause and slow down and change my perspective. And yeah, I still get down and stressed and annoyed with whatever, but it helps me kind of shift my attention and change my perspective on whatever I'm going through, and try to think about a positive approach to that. Do you teach or practice meditation, mindfulness? Do you have any experience
Yeah,
with
and
that?
I do shy away from the word meditation for people with ADHD because I think that has that connotation of, sitting still and just breathing. And I think for most people that haven't had exposure to it with ADHD, especially if you're hyperactive, that's like anathema to them. It's just hard to even conceive.
Yeah.
But I like better the word mindfulness, because what I do stress for people is that mindfulness can be done while you're active. It can be done when you're taking a walk. It can be done when you're in the shower, washing the dishes, just tuning in at the moment to what you're feeling in your senses, what's going through your head, and just being present.
Mm.
That pause. It's similar to the meditation, and you can be tuned into your breath, but I think that it works better at least to get started, to start, even if it's a minute. I've heard the word before, and I think it's an easier way to get people started, is that mini mindfulness or micro mindfulness, where you just take 30 seconds or a minute and just, be in the moment, like how you feel, whether you're sitting. I'm actually sitting right now. So, how I'm feeling sitting in this seat, what background noise I might be hearing, what I'm seeing in my environment, just tuning into your senses and any thoughts that go through your head, which probably many go through your head when you have ADHD, but just letting them be, not holding on to them, just letting them, float. And I think that works, at least as an introduction, better for most people with ADHD than the idea of meditation. I know some people with ADHD that are serious meditators, but I don't think they start it right away, with the 20 minutes, half hour or longer, serious meditations. And it's transformative for the people that are serious about it and make it a regular practice. And one thing I think is really cool, and you've probably heard this research, that meditation, people that are long-term meditators that meditate regularly, that actually makes changes in the prefrontal cortex. So whether people decide to take medication, not meditation, or not, that's short acting. You take your Ritalin, your Adderall, your Vyvanse. It might make a big difference for you short term, but it's not, as far as we know anyway, making any changes in your brain. Whereas meditation and also exercise, but that's another topic, are making changes in your brain, for the good and helping you, helping those executive functions. They're really developing that prefrontal cortex, which is an amazing benefit.
Yeah, and I can completely understand and see where the word meditation might scare people off, especially with ADHD, because of that need for focus. The app that I use actually has it's pretty interesting. They have some walking meditations as well. So obviously there's meditations that you can do with your eyes open as well, and obviously you're not walking with your eyes closed, but it's interesting. One of the biggest revelations I've had in my own meditation practice, and something I talk to friends about when I don't I'm not preaching everybody should meditate, but I'll talk to friends about it when they ask me, and I have friends who say, I can't do it because I can't just focus on my breath, and I think of stuff. And the idea, what I've learned in this is that yes, that's 100% accurate. Everybody does. The thing is, the point here is you let that thought play out in your head like a short film. And what happens when you start doing this is you realize, let's say I think I've got to walk my dog tomorrow, and I start thinking about I've got to walk the dog, but then I envision myself walking the dog tomorrow, and so there's me going outside. Not every step, but me going outside, walking Peggy, and then we come and then we come home, and then I let her off her leash, and then I get back to work. And the thought that I'm explaining is seconds long. It plays out. I can get right back to the breath. So it's just focus on these thoughts as little movies in a way, and let them just play out. And that was a big revelation for me. I was like, oh. Instead of getting frustrated every time I think of I gotta walk Peggy or something.
Yeah. And it's okay. And it's normal. And the more you do that, the more, you're doing work, and you think about walking your dog, and you can get back to your work. You just play out that thought, but you can use that same tool because your brain is getting used to pausing and coming back. It's okay to get off track, and everyone does, but using that to come back to whatever it was you're originally doing.
Yeah, 100%. I remember I saw an interview with Dr. Gupta, who wrote a great book about brain health, and I believe he's the CNN chief medical correspondent or something like that, but most people would know him. And he shared a story, and I can't remember the full specifics of it, but the short version was that he got to meet the Dalai Lama, and they sat in a meditation session together, and Gupta had his eyes closed, and when he suddenly opened them kind of midway through, because he heard the Dalai Lama chuckling, kind of laughing to himself. And he's like, what the heck? So he opened his eyes. He's like, what's up? And the Dalai Lama said something to the effect, I'm totally paraphrasing here, but yeah, the Dalai Lama said, sorry, I'm just having trouble focusing. It was like even the Dalai Lama can't always do it. So
Yeah, I
I
think
thought that
that's a
was
good point. It's
yeah.
a really good point, even for these seasoned, expert, if we could call him an expert meditator, if I don't know who else we could call that.
Mm.
Yeah, they have thoughts that get them off track. All the more so if you have an ADHD nervous system, just to have that self-compassion, realize it's totally normal. Just get back to that breath or, what that studying or whatever it is you were planning to do.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've been finding interesting in my, diagnosis here with ADHD and realizing, oh yeah, okay, because I'm still like months and not even years yet of realizing this is I know it's common to feel as far as like relationships go, you can feel a sense of rejection, and that seems to be kind of somewhat common and or partly common in ADHD folks. But for example, like if I try to, befriend somebody I like, and for whatever reason, they're not calling me back, or we get together, we always have a good time, but they don't call me back. So I eventually just give up. I'm like, okay, just forget them. I've tried enough. They're not willing to give back into the relationship. So, whatever. But I bring that up because now I'm approaching things more empathetically. And the truth is, like myself, I'm starting to detect ADHD in a lot of people that I know who probably are undiagnosed, who probably don't even know. And so right. Now I'm thinking, but then this is the way my brain works now. So let's say I want to meet somebody I like them. I want to become friends, but they're not calling me back. And now with empathy, I'm thinking, okay, maybe they have ADHD or they've got things going on and they haven't called me back. Or maybe they're not, or if they have ADHD, maybe they're fearing rejection and they're not calling me back because they fear being rejected from me. So at what point, this sounds crazy, right? But at which point do I give up and right. not reach back out? Right. Any thoughts in that complicated scenario that I just explained terribly?
No, I get what you're saying. And I totally get what you're saying about once you understand ADHD better, you can not really diagnose, but you can detect, ADHD traits in a lot of people.
Yes.
And having that empathy, even people even though I don't have ADHD, I've detected also on my side of the family, people with ADHD. So it's kind of funny. But looking at them through that ADHD lens is what you're saying is that maybe it's not just they're not interested in you. Maybe they really are afraid, because they've had relationships that haven't worked out and have that rejection sensitivity. I don't know. I mean, there's an easy answer to know at what point you give up. I'm not sure. But I think, if you think that that's your gut is telling you that this person also has ADHD, there may be also this fear of, new relationships and rejection, reach out a couple of times. But if you feel you really just have to trust your gut, like when you've overdone it and it's really just that maybe maybe it's not just that they're not interested in you. Maybe they're just at a busy point in their life and they can't start a new relationship right now. It doesn't necessarily have to be they're overwhelmed with, it doesn't have to be that they're rejecting you or that they have ADHD or fearing rejection. It could be something else entirely. They're overwhelmed with something else in their life. So it doesn't have to be that you take it back and are also, experience that rejection because they're not responding to your overtures of, let's go out again. I think there's still a place to judge them, not just judge them favorably, not just through that ADHD lens of maybe they're also fearing the rejection, but there could be other things going on for them. Because if you go out and you have a good time, I think you really well enough when it's mutual, if you feel like it's genuinely, we had a nice time together, and you felt like you were really connected, but for whatever reason, they're not interested after that, or you try a couple of times and nothing happens. It could be there's other stuff.
Yeah, I could see ADHD being especially challenging for a single adult, trying to meet people like dating and things. I imagine that because I'm just talking about friends. I'm thankfully happily married, and God bless my wife for putting up with me half the time. This is really interesting. So we talked, you mentioned at the beginning, we were talking a little bit about motivation. Are there ways that you've seen that help to motivate someone to do something, help to increase the motivation?
So, we talked a little before about tapping into that dopamine, so with the task itself, maybe there's some kind of angle to create interest for you to ignite the dopamine, maybe in a simple way, people that will watch their favorite show while they're on a treadmill, or, someone that, will, I don't know, listen to their favorite podcast while they're doing something boring, like doing the dishes. Or, we know motivation, for a neurotypical, we can do things. I'm saying we as a neurotypical can do things that are important, even if they're not so interesting, right? And something that's important for you, but not interesting, like maybe your taxes, could be hard to get started. But how can you, make that thing? So let me backtrack. What motivates the ADHD brain? It's not importance, right? We know it's interest, passion. That's the easy one. That's the one that, most people with ADHD know about. That's how they'll get into the flow with things that they love. But there's also competition. So that's like the beauty of those 30-day challenges. It's something that you're not so interested in, but there's like a challenge element, whether it's a challenge to yourself, and being your best in a certain area, or a challenge with other people where you're competing, that can create that dopamine to get you motivated. There's also novelty. You can take something old, and I like this. It's kind of a Dr. Seussian term. One of my ADHD instructors call it re-sparkleizing. It's exactly what it sounds like. Something that's lost its sparkle. How can you make that thing sparkly again to kind of create that motivation again and fire that dopamine? It's all about dopamine. So figuring out how you can get that dopamine is the key. It takes, a lot of people that are with ADHD are not in short supply of creativity. Sometimes it takes creativity to figure out how you can take this thing that is either overwhelming or not interesting, or, whatever it is that's keeping you away from it, and figure out how to make it interesting, make it more interesting. There's the whole idea of gamifying. I'm sure you've heard that term. How can you make this thing into a game? How can you make it fun?
Yeah. And I like, getting back to what we were talking about before, whether it's through technology or analog on pen and paper, you can make things fun by, writing down the goals and scratching them out, as we said. But then there's a lot of, productivity apps and things like that will give you, there's an app I use called Streaks, which is great, which you can add different streaks, like walk the dog. And then you set it to say, I'm going to walk the dog every day. But when you do it, you can click it, and then it shows you how many days you were successful and have in getting a streak. And then ultimately what you're trying to do in that case is form habits and
right.
healthy, good habits.
Yeah. And we were talking about before also that the visual, how important that visual piece is for ADHD. And with something, like walking the dog or exercise or eating healthy, if you see that streak, like you're talking about, you could see it in your app, or you see it on a calendar, checked off all the days you did that thing. That also is motivating, like even if you're off for one day, getting back on because you see that streak, that creates dopamine. And another thing is, tapping into how is this thing meaningful for you, or what's the value in it for you? Knowing, even if someone doesn't like doing taxes and it's the most boring thing, maybe they have a value of being fiscally responsible, or someone that hates doing laundry, but they it's important to them to provide for their family, like a mom or even a dad or whoever, to feel like they're doing their, they're taking care of their household, so tapping into whatever it is. And for bigger things, even more important, someone that's, excuse me, at work and is not everything they do at work is something that they're going to love, but what's the value there? What's the meaning behind a particular project? In the bigger scheme of things, maybe they want to be an expert in their field, or whatever it is, to kind of figure out yourself, what's your why. And that also can be a motivating factor, especially for like longer term things. You might have that motivation most of the time, but when, like, I have a student I'm working with now is doing his dissertation. So it's been like a very long haul. Like, it's been 7 years that he did research, and now he actually has to put it all together. And a dissertation is not something you can do the night before. It's not like, even if you got by with doing your papers the night before for the rest of your academic life, it's not going to work at that point. So really tapping into where's the meaning for him? Like, how does this fit into his goals, his bigger long-term goals? And that's kind of really important, to just keep that bigger why in mind.
Do you have tips around, I straight away, I think of like Simon Sinek and people like that who talk a lot about finding your why. Do you have exercises or techniques to help your clients find their why?
So yeah, there are different tools and exercises. Tapping into what people's strengths are, what experiences in their lives have given them like sense of satisfaction, fulfillment. When you have ADHD, you can kind of forget your positive experiences and focus on the negative. You can remember your failures, but you forget your success. It doesn't even have to be even successes. Anything you found fulfilling, meaningful, satisfying. And it can go back to even kids, when they were in school, like experiences they had that they totally forgot about. So talking about experiences, going back into different points in life, and it's not like a quick exercise, but first it's what they come up with off the top of their head. Those are kind of magical moments that they remember. Those are the first ones. But when you spend a little bit more time on it, not necessarily in the session, but they think about different times in their life, look back at old pictures, think about different areas of their life, personal, academic, work, then people are able to come up with a kind of a list of those experiences that they've found most rewarding. And you can kind of start to see patterns, and you kind of dive into that, and eventually people are able to figure out like what things in life, it's usually not one definite thing, but what areas, what topics, what causes for them are most meaningful.
Yeah, it's a great point all around. And I do personally, something I've posted about online before about that anytime I'm in a bad mood, I scroll through my Instagram feed, because it's all, my personal Instagram is all just, it's not all, but a lot of it is successes I've had, certainly at speaking engagements and helping my clients, but also, family stuff, like, travels that we've had, and lots of great memories there. I because I'm an early adopter in a lot of social media stuff, I started Instagram in 2010. So when it launched, so I have like a pretty long history, thousands of photos on Instagram. So I could just scroll through it. A lot of people use Instagram just for, just kind of marketing materials, really, like quotables and things like that. But for me personally, just going back and looking through some of the photos, and Facebook, have the memories feature that, it creates as well. So I find those helpful. Are you familiar with, there's a Japanese word, ikigai?
I'm familiar with it. I don't know how to say it, but I'm familiar with it.
It's really neat. I mean, it's a cool kind of model where if you imagine like 4 circles, it's hard to describe. I'll include a link to it here so people can see it right in the podcast player. I'll include a link below. But you can see like your ikigai is basically like what you're aiming for, and it mixes like what you love, your passions, your mission, but then also incorporates your profession and vocation and what you do and what people pay you for. and what you're good at, but also what the world needs. And so it taps into like your mission as well. And it kind of by going through the exercise around Ikigai, and it helps you kind of narrow down your own passions and helps you kind of focus on stuff. So I found that that exercise to be pretty rewarding.
Yeah, I think for, most people when they first come to coaching, they're coming in crisis. They're coming because they're on probation at work, or they're, it's the end of the semester and they haven't done any work and exams and all those projects are due in 2 weeks and they don't know how they're going to get it done. They're in some kind of crisis. I would say that's like 90% of people that come to ADHD coaching. But it's when you can, after you do that crisis management and, they are able to really do this kind of work, that's when the real empowerment, the real, joy, comes, because people are used to working with that deficit mentality. I just need to fix, my weaknesses. They're not used to like that, leaning into their strengths, their purpose, their passion, and creating a life around that. And that's where, the best life comes.
That's really interesting. So, you're almost like a firefighter in a way, I guess, like so, in the sense, that your people are coming to you for rescue initially.
Yeah, I think that's really is the majority of people. And that's kind of the way most people live life, just trying to put out fires, whether it's of their health or their job. But really, like, what are we here for? We don't just want to put out fires. We want to live a happy life. We want to live a fulfilling life. So we can get past not just the fires, but having the tools to prevent the fires in the future. And then, have that, you have to start, if you're a minus, I don't mean a minus as a person, like you're below ground zero, you have to hit ground zero first, to put out that fire. And I think that's where positive psychology in general came in. I don't know how much you're familiar with positive psychology, but the founder of positive psychology, Martin Seligman, he was dissatisfied with like psychology's focus on just pathology and mental health. He said, why can't psychology be, once people are healthy emotionally, creating a great life, creating a flourishing life, creating a life that people thrive and are happy, using the best that they have in them to create, their best version of themselves. And I think that's similarly with ADHD coaching. For the most part, people come in, they're struggling with all these ADHD traits, and they want to learn executive function skills, but that's just such a small part of it. In the best coaching, that's just a small part of it is, once you get past that, or not even past that, along the way is creating a good life, creating a life you're happy and joyful and your best self.
I almost picture, as we're talking about that and using that fire analogy, I'm almost picturing like Smokey the Bear, an American icon, that bear pointing at you, that only you can prevent, mental health fires or life fires, only you can prevent fires. But I also think about it. Now I'm born and raised Canadian and live in the US, but I've been here long enough to notice how it seems an American way of, especially as it pertains to health, to only treat your health seriously when there is a fire to put out, rather than being preventative. Right. Have you found that too in your own sort of international travels? And
yeah, I think unfortunately, that's the way most practitioners are in Israel as well. I mean, I think maybe because it's socialized medicine, there's very little of that holistic view. I mean, I'm sure you can find individual practitioners that take a more holistic approach, but I was thinking also, going back to ADHD and the holistic approaches, not just learning to improve your executive function. It helps, not helps. It's the foundation of good ADHD management, to eat well, to exercise, to sleep well, to do those things you enjoy. That's like the really critical piece that is so often lacking. It's hard. It's hard for a lot of people with ADHD, but when you understand how those like lifestyle pieces really impact how your ADHD shows up, it's a game changer. if you're willing to work on those things, if they're, I'm sure in your own life when you're sleeping well, eating well, and doing some kind of exercise, your ADHD will show up a certain way. And if you're sleep deprived, haven't exercised, and are eating garbage, your ADHD will show up very differently. So
Yeah.
that said, holistic approach is, I think, so critical in general.
And it's good advice for anyone listening, neurotypical, neurodiverse. It really doesn't matter. Like focus on your health. When I moved to the US 16 years ago, I was talking to one of my best friends here, and I was looking for a doctor, like a general practitioner. And I asked him, who's your GP? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, like your doctor, like who's your doctor? And he's like, oh, the kid's pediatrician is, and I'm like, no, yours. Like, who do you go see every year for your annual? And he's like, oh, I don't have one. I just go to the doctor when I'm sick. And I'm like, but you take your car in to get tuned up and oil changes.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, yeah. I'm like, well, you need tune-ups and oil changes. So
I love that analogy.
Yeah. So, but this has been such a great conversation, and I really do appreciate all of your insights here. Is there anything that I didn't bring up or a topic we didn't talk about that you thought, you think we should include?
It's a good question. So what's coming up in my head is the idea of ADHD superpowers, and you've probably spoken about that with other people you've interviewed. But I just want to say, just to keep it short, when I first heard that term, I thought it was a joke, to be perfectly honest. I'm like, okay, I didn't really get it. I understand, and I'm a very positive person, but I would say now, really understanding ADHD much better and having a family filled with people with ADHD and working with many, many clients with ADHD, that I really do think that when ADHD is treated well, meaning you understand how your brain works and you understand holistically, getting back to that term, those lifestyle pieces that are important to be your best. And you've learned some strategies, to manage your time, to be productive, and all those things that can be challenging. Really, it is a superpower. And I'm saying this as someone that, doesn't have ADHD. And honestly, there are so many times, Dave, that I honestly feel like I want to be part of the club, not that we can do a do-over here, but I feel like I'm missing out, for the people that really have figured out their ADHD and really worked on it and worked on themselves, honestly, not just their ADHD. It really is a superpower. And I tell young people that come in crisis, people come not just in crisis, they come there, they feel mentally, emotionally beaten, because they've had so many failures or perceived failures. And I think as a coach, my message is there's so much hope, there's so much good, and there's so much, that people with ADHD, the neurodivergent have to offer the world, have to offer themselves if they, just really tune in and lean into those strengths and figure out how to manage those challenges, but leaning into those strengths. And when those challenges are managed, those superpowers really shine.
I do a lot of presentations and public speaking for my business, my day job. And I developed a brand new keynote presentation called More Than a Tree. And it's reaching your roots, standing tall, and branching out. And it really has 3 sections of it, of knowing yourself, respecting yourself, and then finding the others, finding your community. But the know yourself part, I actually do focus on your superpowers. And I have some strategies that I include in that presentation about, how you can find and discover your superpowers. Before we wrap up very quickly, I'm curious, what's an exercise or something you do with your clients to help them discover theirs?
So I think that there are those tools, like I love the VIA strengths. I don't know if you're familiar with the values in action. I love that as a tool because I think, there's two kinds of strengths. Like there's the character strengths, so things like honesty or zest or creativity or fairness. And there's also those performance strengths, like things you do well. So that I think I don't use those strength finder exercises, those kind of assessments, but it goes back to, what have you been, it's a hard question because a lot of people with ADHD, you ask them what are their strengths, they just are silent, unfortunately. So you have to say, well, what would your boss say you do well? What would your mother say you do well? What would your friends say you're good at? And getting back to those experiences that we talked about earlier, that list of those experiences that were satisfying, enjoyable, empowering, fulfilling, those experiences, trying to see patterns in where they felt like they were in the flow, where they felt most engaged and most real, like things that come naturally for them, because sometimes it's not so easy with people with ADHD for them they can't come out and say what their strengths are. Some people know themselves better and have been more on a journey of self-growth before they come to coaching, but many haven't. So it's kind of like going back into those experiences and figuring out from those, where they've really, shown is what's the word? Shown?
I struggle with that one too, actually.
Anyway, yeah. So seeing it from another person's standpoint, if they can't say it themselves, that's one way. And even those experiences they had that other people consider accomplishments, I've also find that they won't even necessarily consider an accomplishment because if it comes naturally, then they won't even acknowledge it as a strength. Oh, can everyone just paint like that or, play music like that or whatever it is, write like that? So it's sometimes like taking that third person perspective.
Yeah.
That the big bird's eye view helps. But I'd be curious what the exercise you use is. I'm always looking for new tools that could be helpful for clients.
Yeah, I'll share that with you. And I was also going to mention one thing I do is when I get hired to deliver a presentation or a workshop for a company, let's say, or a conference, I always connect with the client ahead of time on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. And then after the engagement, they've received survey results from their audience or their team members and so on. After I've done the engagement, I asked them based on the feedback they received, would they mind leaving me a recommendation on my LinkedIn profile? And because I do this in part because it provides social proof. It's not just like, Jim S. says Dave Delaney's lovely, but it's actually like a real person. And in doing this, I've accrued 130 plus now LinkedIn recommendations, and I find that is an exercise that obviously I can use it in marketing material to help grow my business and help find future engagements. But at the same time, when I go through those and review those, that really does help me realize I am great at what I do. People love it. And I get wonderful feedback from my clients. So doing something like that, where you're connecting with your clients ahead of time and then asking them for a recommendation after the engagement, I find has been really helpful.
Yeah. It reminds me of that exercise that a brilliant teacher did, and you've probably heard about this, and a lot of other teachers have duplicated since then, where they gave all this. Are you familiar with this? All the students in the class had to write something positive about everyone else in the class. So then at the end, each student gets a list of what everyone else has said about them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And I've heard people that have kept that their entire lives, because sometimes even for people that know their strengths, hearing from other people, one is very validating, but also sometimes there are things you're not even aware of that if someone notices in you, then you're like, oh, wow, and it makes you smile and it makes you more self-confident. And once we know our strengths, because we don't know them, it's hard to be consciously using them. But when we are aware of our strengths, then we can be more deliberate in using them.
Yeah, I love that because it reminds me at my kids' school, my daughter's choir director, performance director, does that with the kids so that she comes home at the end of the year with a little box, and it's filled with notes from all her classmates with, all positive, things they like about her and things she's good at and stuff. And of course, yeah, she does it for all the others. So, yeah, I love that. That's a great exercise. Great idea.
Yeah, and from the other perspective, also being able to see the good in other people, because even people we don't like for whatever reason, there's always be some kind of good we can see, and even the people that are difficult. So I think it's a good exercise both ways, and be able to see the best in everyone, as well as becoming more aware of what's best in you.
Yeah, I do a leadership presentation called Radical Retention, and one of the exercises I share in that presentation is an example of a chairman of a bank who would write a thank you card for one of his employees every Monday morning.
Nice.
And part of the whole intention there is, and he was asked, like, well, how do you remember, someone every Monday? And he says, if I can't think of somebody, I'm not paying enough attention. And so he writes a thank you note, and he mails it to their house, and it doesn't include like a Starbucks gift card or any of that. It's just a handwritten note in a card from the chairman of the bank, just saying why, he appreciates you, and recognition goes so far, not just obviously for ADHD folks, but for anyone.
100%. So, yeah. I remember hearing from a teacher that, as teachers get all those presents at the end of the school year, and if you've been teaching a long time, there's only so many, flower arrangements or candy bowls or however, whatever people give their teachers at the end of the school year. But the teacher said the thing that's been most powerful for her, the most impactful thing she really enjoys, are those heartfelt notes. They might come with a gift as well, but those notes from the parents that really came from the heart, how that teacher impacted the child, are what's, most meaningful to the teacher.
Yeah. And my wife is a teacher, and so I could definitely attest to that. Yeah. Aviva, this has been so much fun. Thank you for joining us today. How can people get a hold of you and learn more about what you do?
Yeah. So my website, my coaching business is Ascend with Aviva, and my site is ascendwithaviva.com. My email is coach@ascendwithaviva.com. That's probably the best way to reach me. And it's been a pleasure too, Dave. It's been a pleasure hearing about what you do and getting to know you better during this, our conversation that we had.
Hey, thanks for listening to Wise Squirrels. It has been amazing to share this with you. Best way to show your support for the show: leave us a review, follow the show, and share it with the people in your life. We drop new episodes every 2 weeks, so stay tuned for that. Plus, drop by wisesquirrels.com or click the link in the podcast description, and you'll find a lot of different resources like articles, an assessment, a newsletter, lots of good stuff over at wisesquirrels.com. So drop by, let me know what you think, and we'll see you next time. Take care.